The caregiver sang softly to the old man, unaware his wealthy daughter was watching and changed her life. Room 208. Mr. Thompson. Do not expect a response, the nurse said without looking up. Hasn't spoken in months. His vitals are stable, but he's just not there anymore. Clara nodded quietly and tightened her cardigan around her shoulders. The hospital hallway smelled of disinfectant and rain, sharp, cold, and faintly metallic. Thunder rumbled outside as she pushed open the door to the dimly lit room. Inside, the air felt heavier. Mr. Thompson lay motionless in the bed near the window, his face turned slightly to the side. He was an older man, late 70s, maybe early 80s, with thick silver hair and deep lines that etched down from his temples to his chin. His eyes were open, dull, staring at nothing, not the ceiling, not her, not the rain streaking down the window, just emptiness. Clara stood still for a moment. She was 24, brunette, and barely over 5 feet tall. Her life was a far cry from sterile hospital rooms and silent patients. Less than 2 years ago, she had been singing in smoky lounges and jazz bars, her voice carrying over clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Now she worked night shifts as a caregiver, her music packed away like a childhood toy she no longer had time to play with. She stepped to the side of the bed and reached out gently, resting her hand over Mr. Thompson's. His skin was cold. You probably can't hear me, she whispered, her voice trembling. But I used to sing once. My dad said it helped people feel less lonely. She paused, her eyes scanning his unmoving face. The monitors beeped steadily behind her. Unboated, without thinking, she sat down on a chair beside the bed, leaned slightly forward, and after a deep breath, began to sing. Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's breaking. Her voice was soft, wobbly, but warm. The words floated gently into the stillness, filling the corners of the room. She kept singing, her voice growing steadier with every note, even as tears stung the corners of her eyes. Outside the room, someone paused. Elise Thompson, mid-30s, stood frozen just beyond the doorway. She had returned to the hospital after hours, under the radar as always. The staff knew who she was: wealthy, powerful, untouchable, the daughter of the great Edward Thompson, but they also knew not to expect warmth from her. Elise kept her distance. She paid the bills, signed the authorizations, and avoided the rest. She had not intended to come this late. She only stopped by to drop off paperwork, maybe peek in for a moment, as she sometimes did. Never long, never. Inside. But this night, something stopped her in her tracks. A voice. Not loud, not showy, but achingly beautiful in its rawness. She edged closer, just enough to peer through the narrow slit between door and frame. Her eyes found her, a girl with hair the color of autumn leaves, singing to her unconscious father like he mattered, like he was still here, still someone worth singing to. Elise swallowed hard. Her father had been a musician once, a pianist, of quiet fame and uncompromising discipline. Their home had always been filled with sound, but not always warmth. After her mother died, Elise and her father had drifted into separate orbits, mutual silence becoming their unspoken agreement. Now this girl, a stranger, was doing what Elise never dared, reaching him. Clara continued the song, unaware of the woman watching her from the hall. You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile. She let the last note linger, eyes closed, then slowly exhaled. Silence returned, deeper somehow after the song ended. She looked down at Mr. Thompson's face. Nothing, still empty, still silent. She gently squeezed his hand, offered him a small smile of her own, and stood. Outside, Elise stepped back, blending into the shadows just as the door opened. Clara didn't see her as she turned down the corridor, her shoes whispering over the tile floor. Elise stood there for another minute before finally entering the room. Her father hadn't moved, not a blink, not a breath out of place, and yet the air felt different, warmer, lighter. Elise sat in the same chair Clara had just left and stared at the man she'd spent most of her life misunderstanding. I don't know who she is, she murmured, but she saw something in you I stopped trying to see a long time ago. The rain tapped softly on the windows, as if keeping rhythm with a song that hadn't truly ended, and for the first time in years, Elise stayed. Before hospital rooms and late-night shifts, Clara had lived for music. At 21, her voice had become a familiar sound in the jazz lounges tucked into forgotten corners of the city. She sang with a warmth that lingered in the air long after the final note, a voice that could hush a room without effort. Her regular spot was a dimly lit club called Starlight Haven, where regulars would arrive early just to sit closer to the stage. She never sought fame. Clara only wanted to sing songs that meant something, and for a while that was enough. Then came Marcus. He was charming, older, and knew the business, or so he said. He became her manager, her boyfriend, her everything. He promised her bookings, demo recordings, a future. She believed him until the night he disappeared. She came home to an empty apartment. No suitcase, no note, just her bank account wiped clean and her guitar missing. Everything she had saved, gone. Her world collapsed in silence. No more music, no more stage, just questions and rent overdue. She vanished from the scene like a melody left unresolved. Caregiving was never the plan. It started as a desperate attempt to survive. A neighbor worked at a staffing agency and found her a temp job in a hospice wing. 1 week turned into 2, then months. She didn't talk about her past, and no one asked. In her scrubs and ponytail, she was just another quiet girl doing the hard work no one else wanted. She never sang until Mr. Thompson. Something about the way he lay there, silent and alone, reminded her of her father. He had passed away in a hospital room, just like this one. Fluorescent lights, antiseptic smells, and the steady beep of a heart monitor. She had not made it in time to say goodbye. That memory never left her. So when she saw Mr. Thompson for the first time, something stirred inside her. He looked so distant, so far from here, like someone drifting out to sea. And without thinking, she sang, "Smile, though your heart is aching." It was not a performance. It was not rehearsed. Her voice was soft, uncertain, but each note pulled something deeper from her soul. Not for applause, not for approval, just for him. She sang as if reaching across a dark, silent void, hoping that wherever he was, he might hear her. When the song ended, she didn't expect a reaction, and she got none. But for the first time in years, she felt like her voice mattered again. She returned to her rounds, quieter than before, but with a strange lightness in her chest. She couldn't explain it, just that somehow she had sung not to be heard, but to be present, to offer something beautiful into a space system that had forgotten beauty, and that was enough. What Clara did not know was that someone else had heard. It's someone who had not only listened, but would never forget. Elise Thompson was 33, and, on paper, she had everything. The CEO of a rapidly growing tech firm, a penthouse overlooking the skyline, tailored suits, and a calendar booked months in advance. She was the kind of woman who spoke in bullet points, closed deals with a handshake, and never cried. Not even at her mother's funeral. She had built walls so high even she forgot what she was trying to keep out. Growing up, Elise's world had been filled with music but not warmth. Her father, Edward Thompson, was a celebrated pianist who toured across continents. While other kids went to soccer practice with their dads, Elise sat alone at home with sheet music and unanswered questions. Her mother had tried to bridge the gap. She sang to her, taught her to hum lullabies her father once composed, and whispered, "He loves you, just doesn't know how to show it." But when her mother died suddenly from a stroke, Elise was only 12, and whatever thread connected father and daughter snapped clean. Edward returned from a European tour 2 days late for the funeral. Elise never forgave him. As the years passed, they spoke less and less until silence became the only thing they shared. When Edward collapsed from a stroke nearly a year ago, Elise handled everything. The private hospital, the paperwork, the high-end care facility, but she never stepped inside the room, not once. She told herself it was because there was nothing left to say. But then that night, as she passed by room 208, she heard that voice. She did not know the girl, just caught a glimpse of brunette hair and soft features through the cracked door. But her voice sliced through her, not because it was beautiful, but because it was familiar. She was singing Smile, her mother's favorite song, the one she used to hum when Elise couldn't sleep, the one Edward used to play on the piano just once years ago, the night before his final tour. Elise had not heard that song in over 2 decades, but now, hearing it in the dark, sung with such quiet care to a man who had not spoken in months, something broke loose in her. She stayed in the hallway long after the song ended, staring at the door she had avoided for nearly a year. That night, she could not sleep. The next evening, she returned. She still did not go in, but she stood there again, hands in her coat. pockets listening as the girl, Clara, she would later learn, sang softly, unaware of her audience. And for the first time in 10 years, Elise allowed herself to feel grief, guilt, and the smallest spark of something she had buried long ago, the hope that maybe not everything between her and her father was lost. The following night, she brought a chair from down the hall and sat outside the door. She did not say a word. She just listened to the voice, to the silence, to her own heartbeat. And when Clara sang Smile Again, Elise closed her eyes. She could almost hear the piano, almost hear her mother's laugh, almost feel something thawing inside the frozen space she once called a heart. And for the first time in her adult life, Elise stayed. For the next week, Elise came to the care facility every evening, just before 9 o'clock. She never went inside room 208. Instead, she stood a few feet from the door, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, eyes closed, listening. Each night, Clara sang something different. Soft jazz standards, old ballads, sometimes just humming a lullaby Elise could not name but somehow remembered. Her voice was never loud, never polished like a performance. It was raw, warm, and quietly aching. It reminded her of rain tapping on windows, of fireplace crackles, of home, not the mansion she grew up in, but the home she wished had existed. Clara never saw her, or so she thought. One evening, Elise arrived later than usual. She stepped into the hallway just as Clara was placing a blanket over Mr. Thompson and whispering good night. When she turned around, she stopped abruptly. They both froze. Elise was mid-step, caught in the act. Clara blinked, startled. I'm sorry, Clara said quickly, her voice flustered. I didn't mean to. Was I singing too loud? Elise shook her head. No, you weren't. Clara tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, visibly nervous. It's past visiting hours. I usually don't sing this late. Elise looked at her for a long moment, then spoke softly. Don't stop. Clara tilted her head, confused. Don't stop singing, Elise said. Your voice, it brings him back. Clara's eyes softened, her nerves easing just a bit. I'm not sure he hears me. He does, Elise replied. I think maybe he does more than either of us realize. There was a pause. I've seen you here, Clara added cautiously. Most nights, just outside the door. Elise gave a half smile. Yeah, that's me, the woman who lurks and never says anything. Clara laughed under her breath. I'm Elise, by the way. I know, Clara said, and immediately looked apologetic. I mean, they talk. The nurses, of course they do, Elise said, amused. And you are Clara. Clara nodded. Nice to officially meet you. They stood there in the hallway for a moment longer than either expected. The hum of machines down the corridor filled the silence. You used to sing professionally, didn't you? Elise asked suddenly. Clara blinked, surprised. How'd you guess? Your voice, Elise said simply. Clara hesitated. I did. A few years ago. Bars, clubs, small stages. Why'd you stop? Clara looked down. Life, betrayal, bills, the usual. Elise didn't press her. Instead, she glanced toward her father's door. He used to play the piano, Elise said. Professionally, traveled a lot. I didn't understand it when I was a kid. I thought he cared more about music than me. Clara said nothing, letting her speak. After my mum died, Elise continued, we never talked much. I built a life without him. Easier that way. Clara nodded slowly. But you're here. Now, I wasn't. Not until you sang. Clara's breath caught. There was something disarming about Elise's honesty, soft, without shame or performance. I want to try something, Elise said. Something crazy. Clara raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I want you to teach me a song. Something old. One of the ones you sing to him. I want to sing for my dad. Just once. Clara stared at her, taken aback. You want me to teach you to sing? Why not? Elise asked with a grin. It already woke something up in him. Maybe if he hears it from me, maybe he'll remember. Clara looked at her for a long beat, then slowly smiled. All right, but I'm warning you, I'm tough. I think I can handle that. They stood there, smiling like two people who had unknowingly circled each other for far too long, finally meeting in the middle. That night, they sat in the small staff lounge, Clara humming the first few bars of Smile Again, breaking down the lyrics. Elise followed awkwardly off-key at first, then better. With each note, something unspoken began to mend, and for the first time in years, Elise Thompson didn't feel like she was just visiting her father. She felt like she was coming back. To him, one note at a time. Clara had not expected the singing lessons to become a ritual. Yet, every Tuesday and Thursday evening after her shift ended, Elise would show up, sometimes a little early, always a little nervous, and they would meet in the common room of the care facility, where the walls were lined with dusty books and the piano in the corner hadn't been tuned in years. They sat side by side on the worn couch, Clara humming a few bars, Elise repeating them, often off-key, sometimes hopelessly out of rhythm, but she tried. God, she tried. And Clara, to her own surprise, loved every minute of it. Their first song was Smile. Then came Moon River. What a wonderful world, and unforgettable. Elise fumbled the lyrics, mumbled through verses, and sometimes laughed so hard she had to start over. But her voice grew stronger with each attempt. Never perfect, but honest and deeply human. Clara coached her with warmth, occasionally tapping her arm to adjust her breathing, tilting her chin with 2 fingers so she would stop slouching. "You sing from your chest, not your throat," she would say, demonstrating with ease. "You make it look way too easy," Elise would reply, watching her with something like awe. Somewhere between the harmony and the laughter, something deeper began to form, something soft, something quiet, like a song neither of them had sung yet, but both instinctively knew. Elise started bringing dinner with her, homemade chicken soup one night, lasagna the next, and once an attempt at Clara's favorite butternut squash risotto. "How did you know I loved this?" Clara asked, eyes wide. "You mentioned it once at the vending machine 3 weeks ago." Clara blinked. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you say," Elise replied without hesitation. Clara felt something shift in her chest, something warm and dangerous. Between sessions, Elise started helping Clara with small tasks, taking out heavy laundry bags, changing water coolers, even scrubbing a stubborn spot on the floor outside her assigned wing. Each gesture was quiet, practical, and deeply thoughtful. Clara teased her. "You know you're the heir to an empire, right? You don't have to mop floors." Elise shrugged. "Maybe I want to earn my way into something better." One evening, after a particularly long rehearsal, Elise showed up carrying a large, oddly shaped box. "What's that?" Clara asked, raising an eyebrow. Elise set it down gently and peeled back the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a restored, vintage microphone, silver, gleaming with a wide grill and curved stand. Clara gasped. "I saw you stop in front of one like this once," Elise said. "Back when we passed that antique store downtown. You touched the glass, didn't say a word." Clara ran her fingers over it reverently. "I only mentioned it once," Elise smiled. "That was enough." Clara swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "Elise, I can't accept this." "You already have," Elise said gently. "Besides, I didn't get it just for you." Clara looked up, confused. "I got it for us," Elise added, "to sing together." The next afternoon, Clara arranged for a small performance in the care facility's common room. Just a casual concert for the residents, an idea she'd always wanted to try, but never had the courage. Elise insisted on being part of it. They stood together in front of a half-circle of wheelchairs and walkers, the new microphone perched between them. Clara wore a simple navy dress, hair loose for once. Elise had a guitar slung over one shoulder and a lyric sheet folded in her back pocket. They opened with "You Are My Sunshine." The crowd clapped along softly, smiles blooming like spring after a long winter. Clara's voice soared, but it was Elise's steady harmony, raw, imperfect, but heartfelt, that stole the moment. They sang "Can't Help Falling in Love," and then, by request, returned to Smile. When the final note faded, the applause was gentle, but full of emotion. Some of the older patients wiped tears from their eyes. One woman leaned toward her neighbor and whispered, "That girl's in love with her." Clara turned to Elise, cheeks flushed. Elise looked at her with something she had never shown anyone, not even her father. "You know," she said, her voice quiet enough for only Clara to hear, "your voice didn't just reach my father." Clara met her gaze, breath catching. "It reached me, too," Elise continued. "It's healing something I didn't know was broken." Clara didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply reached for Elise's hand. And in that quiet, sacred moment, beneath the soft glow of fluorescent lights, in a room full of forgotten people and old songs, something new began. Not a performance, not a romance written in grand gestures, but a connection so real, so earned. It sang louder than any applause ever could. The news came suddenly. like a knock at the door you never wanted to answer. Elise had been offered a long-term executive role overseas, Switzerland of all places, heading an ambitious merger that would require at least 3 years of her life, possibly more. It was the kind of opportunity people built careers for, the kind of offer no one in her world would ever refuse. But Clara was not part of that world. When Elise told her, Clara smiled softly, trying to seem proud. "That's incredible, Elise. You deserve it." Elise studied her face for something: disappointment, sadness, even anger. But Clara gave her none, only grace. "I haven't said yes yet," Elise offered. Clara looked down, folding a napkin in her hands at the small coffee shop where they always met after her shift. "You should," she said. "It's your dream." Elise hesitated. "And what about us?" Clara gave a soft, bittersweet smile. "We were always borrowed time, weren't we?" Elise wanted to argue, wanted to say no. They were more than a brief moment. But Clara's voice was so calm, so certain, it silenced her. The next day, Elise packed. She left most of her belongings in storage, took only the essentials, and set one final appointment for herself, one last visit to the care facility before her flight. It was late evening when she arrived. The halls were quiet, dimly lit, nurses moving softly between rooms. She didn't ask for Clara. She didn't want her to see her like this, torn, aching, unsure of everything but the sound of Clara's voice echoing in her mind. She stepped into room 208. Her father lay just as always, still unmoving, eyes closed. The monitors beeped steadily beside him, their rhythm the only sound in the room. Elise pulled a chair closer and sat down. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded lyric sheet, the one Clara had scribbled notes on during their lessons. The one she'd once said, "You'll get it perfect one day. Not with your pitch, but with your heart." Elise took a deep breath and began, "Smile, though your heart is aching." Her voice cracked on the second line, but she kept going. "Smile, even though it's breaking." The room felt different now, heavy, full of memories too old to name. She sang, slowly, carefully, putting everything she had into the words, not because she expected a response, but because it felt like the only thing she could give. As she reached the final note, her throat tightened. "You'll find that life is still worthwhile, if you just smile." She bowed her head, eyes stinging, lips trembling. "I don't know if you can hear me," she whispered, "but I hope this meant something. I'm sorry it took me so long." Her father didn't move, no twitch, no flicker. Elise sat a moment longer, then stood, brushing her hand along the side of the bed. "Goodbye, Dad." She turned and walked slowly toward the door, her shoulders heavy with things she never got to say. And just as she stepped into the hallway, behind her, inside the quiet room, Edward Thompson's eyes opened. They blinked slowly at the ceiling, his lips moving, dry and fragile. "Elise," he whispered, but the hallway was already empty, and the daughter he had waited so long to call out to was gone. The next morning, everything changed. The night nurse was the first to notice. When she entered room 208 to check vitals, she nearly dropped her clipboard. Edward Thompson's eyes were open, wide, alert, following her every movement. She called for the attending physician, who rushed in with a team. Blood pressure, pupil response, motor function, everything showed signs of return. Not full consciousness, not yet, but awareness. A flicker of light in what had been a locked room. And then, clear as day, he whispered one word: "Elise." Clara was across the building when she heard. She sprinted through the halls, still in her scrubs, tears already welling before she reached the room. She burst in just in time to see Edward's eyes shift toward her. They softened. She dropped to her knees beside the bed, clutching his hand. "You're back," she breathed, voice shaking. "You're really back." He didn't speak, but the faintest smile pulled at the corner of his lips. A response, a miracle. She cried then, quietly, fully, her hand pressed to her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. Later that morning, Clara stepped into the hallway, took a breath, and called Elise. Elise answered on the second ring. "Clara," her voice was trembling. "Elise, your father, he said your name." There was silence on the line. "I don't understand," Elise finally whispered. "He's awake," Clara said, barely believing it herself. "He's here. He asked for you." Elise didn't wait for more. By nightfall, she was back. She cancelled the meetings, left the contract unsigned, told the board she had a family emergency, and walked away from a multi-million-dollar deal without blinking. Clara met her in the lobby. Elise looked different, her face drawn from the overnight flight, eyes clouded with hope and fear. Clara stepped forward, unsure what to say, but Elise pulled her into a hug before she could speak, holding her like someone anchoring herself to the only truth that mattered. "Where is he?" Elise asked. Clara led her to room 208. Edward was sitting slightly upright, propped by pillows. His head turned slowly when Elise stepped in. Their eyes met. Elise froze. Neither spoke for a moment. There were no rehearsed speeches, no grand gestures, just a long, trembling pause. And then, Edward lifted a shaking hand. Elise crossed the room in 3 strides and took it. She sat at the edge of the bed, gripping her father's fingers like a lifeline. "I'm here, Dad," she whispered. "I'm here." Edward blinked slowly, his voice barely more than breath. "You sang." Elise nodded, her eyes glistening. "I did. She taught me." His father's gaze drifted to Clara, who stood in the corner, silent and tearful. "Thank you," Edward rasped. Clara smiled through her tears. Later, after the doctors cleared the room, Elise found Clara sitting in the garden courtyard behind the building, her hands folded in her lap. Elise sat beside her, reached for her fingers, and held them tightly. "You didn't just bring him back," Elise said softly. "You brought me back, too." Clara turned to her, eyes shining in the low garden light. "You brought my father home, and you brought my heart home with him." Clara leaned her head on Elise's shoulder, and in the stillness of that moment, surrounded by blooming flowers and the quiet hum of life beginning again, they simply sat. 2 hearts, once scattered, now returned. 1 year later, music returned to the halls of the care facility, not from a radio or a speaker system, but from the heart of room 208. Edward Thompson, once thought lost to silence, now sat in the courtyard. On a crisp spring morning, a piano was wheeled out for him. His fingers trembled, not from fear or weakness, but from the overwhelming emotion of playing again. Clara sat beside him, a music stand in front of her, sheet music fluttering in the breeze. Elise stood nearby, tuning an old acoustic guitar with quiet concentration. The past year had changed all 3 of them. Edward's recovery had been slow but steady. Physical therapy, daily practice, and the quiet miracle of human connection had brought him back enough to play again, enough to smile, enough to say, "I love you," to the daughter he once pushed away. Elise had stepped back from her overseas role, choosing instead to work remotely, consulting on projects that allowed her to remain close. She still wore suits, still answered calls, but her days no longer belonged to boardrooms. They belonged to her father, to Clara, to something real. And Clara had started singing again, not in smoky lounges or echoey bars, but in rooms like this one, for people who needed music, not as background noise, but as balm. She began teaching music therapy part-time, humming lullabies to dementia patients, and rediscovering the soul she once feared she had lost. Together, the 3 of them planned a small concert, a thank you to the facility, to the nurses and residents who had watched this unlikely family form. The common room was decorated with paper flowers, hand-drawn signs, and a banner that read, "An afternoon of music and miracles." Residents wheeled in, staff took their places, and a soft hush fell over the room as Edward stepped onto the makeshift stage, his fingers resting lightly on the piano keys. Elise followed with her guitar. Clara stood at the mic, wearing a simple white dress, her hair down in loose curls. They opened with "Smile," the song that had started everything. Edward's fingers moved gracefully, slower than in his prime, but rich with emotion. Clara's voice soared, stronger now, seasoned by time and healing. Elise's strumming kept them grounded, steady, a quiet heartbeat beneath the melody. When they finished, the room erupted into applause. Some residents clapped slowly, others wiped their eyes. A few whispered, "That was beautiful," again and again. But the performance was not over. Clara took a small bow, then turned to step away from the mic. Elise stopped her gently. "Stay," she whispered. She set down her guitar and pulled something from her jacket pocket, a small velvet box. The crowd quieted, breaths held. Clara froze, eyes wide. Elise dropped to one knee. "I wasn't sure what love was," Elise said, voice trembling slightly, but steady. "Not until I heard it in your voice, in the way you sang for my father, in the way you brought him back to life." She opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring set with a single sapphire. You don't wear armor," she continued. "You wear light, and somehow you lit up the darkest corners of my life." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she raised her hand to her mouth. "I don't need a stage or a spotlight or a perfect plan. I just need you." Elise looked up, eyes filled with something sacred. "Will you marry me?" The room burst into soft gasps and quiet cheers. Clara laughed through her tears, nodding. "Yes, of course, yes." Elise slid the ring onto her finger, stood, and pulled her into a gentle embrace. From his chair nearby, Edward pushed himself up, not icily, but with determination. A nurse stood to help him, but he waved her off. Step by step, he crossed the room to them. He reached out, took Clara's hand in one of his, Elise's in the other, and then quietly, he began to cry. The applause that followed was thunderous, not because of the performance, or even the proposal, but because every soul in that room understood what had just happened. Healing, love, home. Elise turned back to the mic, cleared her throat and said, "If you'll indulge me for one more minute." The room fell silent again. "She didn't know," she began, "that when she sang for my father, she wasn't just singing for him. She was writing a new song, one for me, one I didn't even know I needed." She glanced at Clara, her voice thick with emotion. "She gave me back my father, and in doing that, she gave me back myself." She paused, then smiled. "I used to think I wasn't meant for love, that home was a thing you earned or bought or faked. But now I know it's something you find." She reached for Clara again, and I found mine in her. The room stood to its feet. In the crowd, a resident wiped her eyes and whispered, "That's the kind of love you don't get in the movies." But maybe, just maybe, it was the kind you got in real life. And for Clara, Elise, and Edward Thompson, it was only the beginning of the greatest song they would ever write together. If this story touched your heart, we hope you'll carry its melody with you, just like Elise carried Clara's voice into the quiet corners of her life. At Kindness Power, we believe in the quiet power of love, healing, and second chances. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest acts, a song, a touch, a whispered name can change everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that could stir your kind and warm your heart. Thank you for being here. And remember, home isn't a place. It's someone who sings your name back to you when you've forgotten the words.